Steve, good evening.
Good evening, Tom. How are you? Can you hear me okay? Hello?
I'm not sure about the sound. Yeah, I can see you, Steve. I don't know if you can
me?
hear
Can you
me,
hear
but
me?
I'm afraid we can't still hear you.
Oh dear. Okay, I'm not on mute. Can anyone else hear me? Can the participants hear me? No? They can. You can. I see people nodding. But
Yeah,
maybe, Tom, can you hear me?
loud and clear. Thank you very much.
Oh, there we go. Great. Hey,
That
how
was
are you?
here we are. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Really good. Very excited. And thanks so much for bringing out the new book. I hope everyone's enjoying it.
Well, maybe not everybody has read it yet. So what can you tell us about the new book?
Well, this book is I'm a huge fan of Patricia Highsmith and Alfred Hitchcock. They're two brilliant storytellers for me, and I wanted to do my own Hitchcockian tale. And where they collide, those two artists collide, is Strangers on a Train. And actually, I don't know if you can see, I have a poster of Strangers on a Train in my office, and it's the basic premise is two people meet by chance and they both want to kill someone, and they decide, well, look, I mean, if I kill this person that I want dead, I'll be the first person the police arrest. So they said, well, what if I kill the person you want dead and you kill the person I want dead? Well, we all have our alibis. So it's the kind of a riff on The Perfect Murder. So in this book, it's two women and they meet in a bereaved parents counseling group. And our main character, Amanda White, her daughter has been murdered. The police know who did it, but they can't prove it. And Amanda can't move on from that. And she meets someone in this group in almost the same situation. And they decide, well, look, if you kill this person for me, I'll kill the person that murdered your child. And they agree on this terrible pact. The other part of the book follows a lady called Ruth, who is relatively newly married, and she's in her home, and something terrible happens to her at home. Someone breaks into her house, and she is attacked. And the book follows Ruth's story to see how she deals with that, and Amanda's story as she is locked in this terrible pact with someone else to commit murder, and all of the things that go wrong from that.
And it was originally a book by Patricia Highsmith, and then Hitchcock made it into a movie, right?
That's correct. Yes, so it was Patricia Highsmith's first novel, and she said that she wrote a little book about writing suspense fiction. And she said in that book she was never happy with Strangers on a Train because she felt it relied too much on coincidence. And also the people in that novel and in the movie, they want to kill someone for not very good reasons. You know, it's greed or kind of you know, one of them wants to kill his wife who's divorcing him. So I wanted it to be the situation where the reader is very much behind Amanda. You're with Amanda. You think she should get justice. And I wanted you rooting for her. I also wanted to make it about two women because I think women have a greater sense of justice, perhaps, than men. So and updating the whole scenario for the present day and setting it in New York. So it was a lot of fun to write.
Was it? Yeah. Is it different for you to write a book because it's a standalone book? You also writing the Eddie Flynn series. Is a bit different difference for you to write a book in a series or a standalone novel like this one?
Yes, I think I'm trying to learn from writers who are better than me. So I look at writers like Michael Connelly and James Lee Burke, and while they write series, they will also go and do standalone novels. And I think when you do that, you stretch yourself. You're learning something different. It's all new characters, And it's still the same suspense fiction that I write. You know, it's got everything from one of my books that you would come to expect. You know, the pace is very pacey. There's characters you're rooting for, and there's really bad people who do terrible things. So I think it's fun to go and do something different every now and again. I learn something from stretching my legs, and I bring that back then to the Eddie Flynn series.
Well, and it's fun for the readers as well. I mean, obviously readers can't get enough of Eddie Flynn, but this one, you hit this one out of the park as well. So it's a very exciting read.
Thank you.
Yeah, switching back just a second about the themes you touched upon just now, injustice and in this case vengeance as well. That those are themes we see more in your work. Why are they important to you? You think is it something you do consciously or?
Yeah, I think I've always been writing about justice in one way or another, but it's mainly the fact that justice is an elusive thing. You know, you don't often get justice in real life. That's why Eddie Flynn is a con artist. I think it takes someone, you know, who doesn't play by the rules to balance the scales of justice a little bit. And that's exciting for me. In this situation, I wanted to deal with the frustration of victims because Amanda is a victim of crime. Her child has been taken from her, and the justice system has failed her and her family. And the question is, I want the reader asking themselves the question: well, what would I do if I'm in that situation? How far would I go? And you're doing this, you're questioning what Amanda's doing, and you're thinking, would I do that? Would I go that far? And I'm trying to gradually, you know, slowly take the reader along that path to see how far they would go. And of course, I know all of my readers would certainly go as far as Amanda.
Yes. I've got quite a few more questions to ask you, but in the meantime, I like to mention that also for the viewers tonight, as before, they can jump in with questions as well for you, Steve, and for later on with all the Q&As we're doing tonight. So please, audience members, feel free to put questions in the chat, and they'll come to me, and we can ask them to we can pose them to Steve.
Brilliant, thank you.
Conversation. And this was on the justice part. On the vengeance part, I read somewhere you said, I described the aftermath. This was also about violence. The reader does the work for me. You will never see the knife going in. I'm much more interested in the blood going down the plug hole. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on that quote?
I think again, this takes us back to Hitchcock and his movie Psycho. There is a murder scene in that movie in a shower, and you see blood going down the plug hole, and you see people, you think you see someone being stabbed, but you don't see it. You never see that happen. You think you're seeing it. Same with the movie Reservoir Dogs. People talk about that movie. Oh, that's the movie where the guy gets his ear cut off.
Yeah, the
ear. You don't see that happening. Before that happens, the camera turns away to a brick wall. So what I think is, whilst there is violence in my books, I never want it to be gratuitous. And I wanted, you know, there's action scenes which are different from violence, but I would never show violence against a vulnerable person. But where there are episodes of violence, I try to let the reader, I give enough information so that it's left to the reader's imagination as to what happens. So if my books are very violent, that's the reader's fault. They've created that in their minds, and it's nothing to do with me.
So that is a consciousness. That's very interesting. This is all consciously done by you, and we just got a question about your writing process. Does Steve work with an outline, or are you more of an intuitively working author? How is that process? How does that work for you?
Well, it's not really a process, so to speak. I will have an idea, a very rough, very basic idea, and I will just try and take a couple of days to think who the character is going to be, and then I'll start writing. So I have no plan, I have no outline. I'll know one or two of the characters very roughly, and I discover them as I write. So I make it all up as I go along. Now, some people are surprised at this because there's lots of plot twists in my books.
Cavanagh.
What I try to do is
Yeah.
stop every now and again and go back and read over what I've done. So I'm looking for ways to twist the story, but nothing is planned out in advance. It's quite an organic process for me.
Is it something you're working on at the moment? So, for example, let's take the next book you're working on. You just sit down. Do you have a basic idea to work on?
Yeah, well, I've just finished the next Eddie Flynn novel. So this will be Eddie Flynn 8. It doesn't have a title yet, but the basic idea for that book was, who is the worst person to witness a murder? And what would happen if the witness to a murder was more dangerous than the killer? So that was the basic idea for this book. And it's about a young lady called Ruby Johnson, who works for a lot of millionaires. There's a street in New York City called West 74th Street. And there's lots of bankers and, millionaires, lawyers, and people that live in this street. And Ruby used to live there, this young girl, but she doesn't live there anymore. And she works for a few of the families as a housemaid and a nanny. And she's going home one night and she sees a murder. She sees one of the neighbors being killed and she knows who did it. But the thing is, there's something very wrong with Ruby Johnson. And Ruby calls the police, but she doesn't tell them who the real killer is. She gives them the name of an innocent man in the street, and you don't know why. But this sets off a chain of events, and Eddie Flynn is brought in to represent this innocent man accused of this murder. And you don't know why Ruby has done this, but she is in the background manipulating everyone in this street and the investigation as the case progresses. So that she was a lot of fun to write. And as I was writing it, I didn't know what Ruby was up to. But that's the main thrust of this new story, which I'm hoping will be coming next year.
Wow!
But it's finished. It's being edited at the moment.
I'm sure you met Lee Child at various occasions. Did you talk about the writing process? Because I know he writes the same way. I mean, Jack Reacher gets off the bus and he doesn't know yet where he is or what's happening next. But so you have a similar writing style then.
Similar writing style, although Lee is much better than me, I have to say. But I do love Lee Child. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. Very, very generous to everyone, readers and writers. And an incredible guy. Very, very, he is a slightly different process from me. Sometimes he won't even have an idea.
Awesome.
At least I have a rough idea, a rough question. Lee will just sometimes just write, and he'll get a first line. Like one of the books was, it was hard to move a body like Keever's. And you sort of think, well, what's going on there? But Lee didn't know when he wrote that sentence who Keever was or why it was hard to move him. And then, of course, Jack Reacher rolls into town on a train shortly after and will investigate with Lee who Mr. Keever is and why he's dead and why he's hard to move his body.
You just mentioned how much fun it was to write this new character of the next book. Another audience member's question is, what's the biggest difference between writing a male and female main character, if any, for you?
I don't think there's much of a difference. I try to avoid lots of the cliches which are associated with certain female characters, especially from male writers. So I want to make my female characters very real, and as real as I can, so that they ring true for the reader. So that is always something that I'm conscious of, and I'm also conscious of writing about issues which affect women. So one of my characters in the Eddie Flynn series is Kate Brooks. And some of the books deal with the discrimination she had as a female lawyer, how she deals with that, and how she continues to manage her career working with Eddie, because she's very smart, but also quite straight. She doesn't get involved in any of Eddie's schemes, which is a slight conflict there for the two of them. But I don't approach it any differently. I'm just perhaps more conscious of touching upon issues which relate more to women than men, and to make the characters real and feel real to the reader.
Excellent. Manon has a question. I think I read a quote from you somewhere that your advice to newborn writers is to write a lot and read a lot.
Yes.
I know you're a big reader as well. Manon asks, is there a book you love to reread? And what is the first book you remember reading?
Oh, I can't remember the first book I remember reading. I did for a period of time reread Lord of the Rings. I used to read it at Christmas time. I first read that one as maybe around 10 years old. And for the next 10 years, I reread it every Christmas and I loved it. And I still think it's a masterpiece, Lord of the Rings. I occasionally go back and will reread some crime novels, classics, that maybe I've missed. So I will go back to Elmore Leonard, or Highsmith, or Dorothy L. Sayers, some people like that, and go through some of their works. I reread Strangers on a Train when I was writing this one, and I also read back to some of Highsmith's Ripley novels, which are brilliant, especially the first one, The Talented Mr. Ripley, because in that book, Tom Ripley is a con man, and it turns out a killer. And the brilliant trick she pulled off in that is you are rooting for Tom Ripley in that book, even though he does terrible things and he hurts innocent people, but you're still with him. You still want him to get away. And I love that trick that she pulled on the reader. So that's something that intrigues me, and I try to learn from. Again, I'm always trying to learn from writers who are better than me. So that's why I say to new writers, read as much as you can and try and learn. You can learn from reading.
Yes, you do. Here's a question from Dennis. Where do you get your ideas from, or do they just come to you?
Mostly I sit down and look for ideas. Occasionally, I'll read an news article, or I will, overhear a conversation or something like that. But normally I sit down and I think, well, what's the worst thing that can happen in this situation or that situation? Who's the worst person to have on a jury? Oh, a serial killer. That would be pretty bad. So I try to think of interesting scenarios where there's conflict, or something kind of original. So yes, I do take inspiration from movies. I mean, obviously this new book is inspired by a story, but I've taken that story and done my own thing with it. So inspiration can come from anywhere. The good thing is to try to be open to inspiration, and to also to sit and think about new ways, and sometimes colliding two stories together works as well. So I just try to keep an open mind and think of the worst thing that can happen.
So less so from your history as an advocate yourself, as a lawyer.
Yeah, no one would believe me.
What you've seen, you mean?
No, because some of the cases I've done, no one would believe it. They would think that's totally ridiculous. For example, I once represented a man who kept getting arrested, like 2 or 3 times a week, for shoplifting, for stealing from shops. And by the time he came to court, he had about 30 charges against him, 30 different files. The problem was he always stole the same thing from the store, different stores. He always stole lasagna, frozen lasagna or microwave lasagna. So by the time we got to court, the prosecutor had totally lost his way. And because my client was saying, yeah, I did take that lasagna on that date, but not that one. That was somebody else took that lasagna. And the prosecutor had totally mixed up all the files, didn't know what lasagna was whose. And in the end, they dropped all of the charges. We used to call him Garfield in the office, our clients. So, but again, if I put that in the book, no one would believe me.
It would be a larger than life character.
Yeah.
From the start. Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. More Deal, the new book, out now. read it, get it. Thank you, Steve, for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you to everyone at LS Amsterdam, and thank you all for coming. I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you, man. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.